The farm with no land. So you want to own a seaweed farm. You lease part of the ocean, hang ropes beneath the surface, attach tiny seedlings, and let sunlight and seawater grow your crop. No land, no irrigation, no feed. It sounds almost impossible to lose money. Months later, you pull tons of seaweed from the water. It can become food, fertilizer, animal feed, cosmetics, packaging, or pharmaceuticals. The crop looks cheap to grow and valuable to sell. But now consider Sea Forest, an Australian company built around a high-value seaweed-derived livestock supplement. By the end of 2025, the company had decommissioned its marine farm and was moving toward a manufactured formula it described as cheaper, more consistent, and easier to scale. In the 6 months ending December 2025, it reported 2.76 million Australian dollars in total revenue, but only $796,200 in product sales. Its loss was $3.94 million. Sea Forest did not decide that seaweed had no value. It discovered something more important. Owning a valuable seaweed product and owning a profitable seaweed farm are two completely different businesses. That creates the real mystery. How can a crop that needs no land, no fresh water, and almost no purchased feed still become expensive to produce? Why can 1 kilogram leave the farm worth little more than $1, then appear in a premium product worth many times more? And why might a seaweed company decide that the farm is the least attractive part of its own supply chain? The answer begins with one hidden fact. Most of what you harvest is water, and unless a paying customer is already waiting on shore, a huge crop can become a huge problem. Seaweed is not one business. Global seaweed production is enormous. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimated total algae production at 37.8 million tons in 2022. But most production comes from established Asian markets with experienced farmers, mature processors, and existing customers. A new farm does not automatically inherit that system. It must choose a species, a farming method, a product, and a buyer. Cold water farms may grow kelp on long lines. Tropical farms may grow red seaweed for carrageenan. Others produce nori on nets or asparagopsis for livestock supplements. Every model has different costs. A tropical farmer may harvest repeatedly and sun-dry the crop. A North Atlantic kelp farmer may grow one seasonal crop and harvest during a short spring window. A land-based farm gains control but pays for tanks, pumps, filtration, electricity, and labor. An offshore farm gains space but accepts more weather risk. Never ask, how profitable is seaweed? Ask which species, grown in which system, sold in which form, to which buyer, after how much processing. Change any one of those answers and you change the entire business. For this ownership model, imagine a cold water longline kelp farm in North America or Northern Europe. It is the clearest way to see where the money goes. What you are actually buying. From shore, the farm may look like a few buoys. Below the surface sits a production system. Anchors hold the farm against tides and storms. Mooring ropes support seeded grow lines. Buoys control depth, while connectors, weights, and navigation markers keep the structure in place. Then you need a workboat. It carries seed, tools, crew, and harvested seaweed with a winch, deck space, containers, and enough stability to lift wet biomass safely. On land, you may need refrigerated storage, wash stations, containers, and transport. If you want to process the crop yourself, the business changes again. Now you need freezers or dryers, packaging equipment, testing, storage, and sales. The ropes are not the expensive part. The expensive part is installing them, inspecting them, harvesting them in bad weather, and preserving the crop before it spoils. This creates two capital stacks. One is at sea, anchors, ropes, buoys, vessels, and harvest equipment. The other is on land, cooling, processing, testing, packaging, and distribution. Own only the farm, and you depend on a processor. Own both and you may capture more margin. But you are now running a seasonal factory as well as a farm. Before either system makes money, however, you need permission to use the water. The hidden value of the lease. You cannot choose a seaweed site by finding an empty space on a map. The crop needs the right temperature, nutrients, light, depth, and current. The site must be productive enough to grow seaweed, protected enough to survive storms, and close enough to a harbor and processor. A perfect site far offshore may be a terrible financial site. Every inspection requires more fuel, crew time, and weather clearance. The water may also be used by fishing boats, ferries, coastal communities, shipping, wildlife, or tourism. You are not buying empty ocean. You are asking permission to place private equipment inside a public, commercial, cultural, and ecological space. In one recent survey of the United States seaweed industry, growers reported permitting timelines ranging from less than 6 months to more than 2 years. Most reported waiting between 6 months and 2 years. The application fee is only part of the cost. During the wait, the owner may pay for surveys, engineering, insurance, legal support, and staff without knowing when production can start. Approval may also limit the farm size, species, equipment, or expansion rights. This makes a productive permitted site a hidden asset. It may be worth more than the ropes attached to it, but even the perfect lease cannot control the biology. Nature replaces inputs with risk. Kelp farming begins in a hatchery. Microscopic reproductive material grows under controlled conditions onto fine twine, which is later wrapped around the farm's lines. Crews deploy the lines, and the kelp grows using nutrients already in the water. This is where the zero-input crop story comes from. There may be no fertilizer bill and no feed truck, but nature has not removed cost. It has replaced purchased inputs with uncertainty. You do not pay the ocean for nutrients, but you cannot order more nutrients when growth is weak. You do not pay for irrigation, but you cannot switch off a storm. Visit too rarely and a loose line can become a major loss. Visit too often and monitoring consumes the margin. Then comes the number that controls the entire business, the 1-ton reveal. Suppose 1 meter of line produces 6 kilograms of wet kelp. 20,000 meters could produce 120 tons. That sounds industrial. Now follow 1 ton from the water to the buyer. At a farm gate price of $1.40 per wet kilogram, 1 ton generates $1,400 in revenue. Before receiving that money, the farmer must seed, install, inspect, harvest, trim, land, and deliver the crop. Then the processor faces the real problem. Fresh seaweed is heavy, perishable, and mostly moisture. Processing guidance from Alaska notes that dried and sorted recovery can be only 5 to 10% of the raw weight. 100 kilograms of wet seaweed may leave only 5 to 10 kilograms of dried product. The truck transported the other 90 kilograms. The dryer removed it, and the processor paid the energy bill. That does not make dried seaweed unprofitable. It explains why the dried product must sell for much more. The processor loses weight, uses energy, pays labor, rejects damaged material, tests the remainder, and finds customers. Selling fresh avoids the drying bill but creates a countdown. The crop must be stabilized or delivered quickly. A processor cannot accept unlimited seaweed just because the farm had a strong harvest. If several farms harvest during the same 2 weeks, perfectly good seaweed may have nowhere to go. The crop is not valuable because it is heavy. It becomes valuable only after someone preserves, extracts, or markets the small part that the customer actually wants. And the owner may have only a few days to complete that conversion. The harvest cliff. Seaweed grows for months, but seasonal kelp may need to be harvested inside a narrow window. Blade quality, fouling, buyer schedules, and weather all influence the deadline. That compresses boats, labor, transport, and processing into the same period. A farm designed for the average day may fail during harvest. Your entire annual result can depend on whether the right boat, crew, truck, and freezer are available during one short window. Harvest early and you sacrifice yield. Harvest late and the crop may lose quality or miss the buyer's schedule. Bad weather can hold the boat in port while the crop continues to age. When conditions improve, every local farmer may want the same crew and processing slot. Wet kelp is heavy and difficult to handle. Lines must be hauled and containers filled without contaminating the product. Machines can reduce the cost per ton, but machines require scale. A large harvester makes little sense for a farm producing only 100 tons. Manual labor keeps a small farm flexible, but expensive. This is the scale trap. You need volume to justify automation, but you need buyers and processing before it is safe to grow that volume. And processors want dependable volume before they invest in capacity. The only way through that trap is to start with the customer, the buyer before the farm. A seaweed farm without a buyer is not storing grain. It is growing a perishable obligation. The ideal deal begins before the seed enters the water. The buyer agrees on species, volume, quality, delivery form, and price. The farmer builds the season around that demand, but a contract can still hide risk. Does the buyer guarantee minimum volume? Can it reject seaweed for moisture, contamination, damage, or inconsistent active compounds? Who pays for transport? Who absorbs a weak harvest or buys a crop larger than expected? And can the price rise if wages, fuel, seed, or packaging become more expensive? A guaranteed price without guaranteed volume is not guaranteed revenue. And guaranteed volume without clear quality rules may still leave the farmer holding the crop. If there is only one regional processor, that processor may control the farm without owning it. Fresh biomass cannot travel far, so the farmer may have 10 theoretical markets but only one practical loading dock. The opposite risk appears when the farmer integrates downstream. A branded food, cosmetic ingredient, or agricultural product can sell for many times the value of its raw seaweed. But the retail price must also pay for processing, packaging, marketing, distribution, retailer margin, and unsold inventory. Specialty markets offer higher prices but limited volume. Commodity markets offer volume but low prices. The ideal product must be valuable enough to support local farming costs and large enough to absorb the harvest. That combination is much rarer than a list of possible seaweed uses suggests. Where the real profit moves, the simplest farm sells wet biomass. It also captures the smallest share of the final value. The next stage stabilizes the crop through freezing, blanching, fermenting, or drying. The next stage mills, extracts, formulates, or brands it. Each step can increase revenue per kilogram. Each step also creates a new business with new costs and risks. Extraction needs equipment, energy, and consistent feedstock. Food requires safety controls and consumer demand. Feed products may need trials and approvals. Cosmetics and supplements need formulation, marketing, and distribution. The margin moves toward whoever controls the scarce step. The permit, the hatchery, the processing plant, the scientific evidence, the formulation, the brand, or the customer contract. Vertical integration can therefore make the farm more profitable. It can also destroy the owner. Build a dryer before securing enough biomass and you own an underused factory. Build a farm before securing processing and you own a crop with nowhere to go. Launch a brand before stabilizing supply and you own customers you cannot serve. The strongest business may not own every stage. It may coordinate them through contracts. Farmers commit volume. Processors reserve capacity. Buyers agree on specifications. Harvests, boats, and labor are coordinated. The supply chain is built backward from demand. That brings us back to sea forest. The farmed sea forest removed. Sea forest developed sea feed, a livestock supplement connected to compounds found in Asparagopsis seaweed. The commercial promise was far more valuable than selling raw seaweed, a product designed to reduce methane emissions from cattle while potentially improving productivity. But turning that idea into a consistent product required cultivation, research, manufacturing, and sales. For the 6 months ending December 2025, Sea Forest reported $796,200 in product sales. Cost of sales was almost $640,000. Employee expenses were $2.83 million, and the final loss reached $3.94 million. These are not the accounts of a normal local kelp farm. They show what can happen when consistency, validation, and commercialization cost more than the biomass itself. Then came the most revealing decision. The company decommissioned its marine farm and sold marine and hatchery assets. It moved toward a manufactured formulation using seaweed-derived and nature-identical components. The company said the new approach could offer lower cost, greater consistency, stronger concentrations, and better scalability. The valuable product remained. The dependence on ocean-grown biomass was reduced. Sea Forest had not removed seaweed from the idea. It had removed the farm from the center of the economics. This does not prove marine farming has no future. It proves that when a customer buys a function rather than a plant, the farm must compete with any cheaper and more consistent technology. That can include land-based cultivation, other species, fermentation, or manufactured substitutes. The lesson is simple. Never value a farm using the retail price of the final product unless the farm owns a defensible share of that product's margin. Now we can build the owner's numbers. The 8-hectare farm. Imagine an 8-hectare nearshore kelp farm. At 4-meter spacing, it holds about 20,000 meters of seeded line. At a yield of 6 kilograms per meter, the farm produces 120,000 kilograms, or 120 wet tons, in a normal season. Assume an initial investment of $250,000. That covers farm equipment, a used workboat or vessel contribution, basic harvest gear, permitting, installation, and first season working capital. It does not include a large processing factory. At a farm gate price of $1.40 per wet kilogram, annual revenue reaches $168,000. 120 tons sounds like a large industrial harvest. But at $1.40 per kilogram, the entire annual crop produces less revenue than many small restaurants. Now subtract the costs. Seed and deployment materials, $40,000. Seasonal labor, $38,000. Boat costs, $22,000. Transport, testing, refrigeration, and product loss, $12,000. Lease, permits, administration, and overhead, $25,000. Total operating cost is $137,000. The farm produces $31,000 before interest, tax, depreciation, major storm repairs, and a full market salary for the owner. That is a 12.4% operating return on the initial investment. It may work as an extension of a fishing or aquaculture business that already owns a boat and employs experienced crew. It is far less attractive if kelp alone must pay for a vessel, full-time management, and debt. Now reduce the yield by 25%. The farm produces 90 tons instead of 120. Revenue falls from $168,000 to $126,000. Most seed, permit, insurance, and deployment costs remain. Total cost falls only slightly, to about $129,000. The $31,000 operating profit becomes a $3,000 loss. A 25% fall in biological yield has erased more than 100% of the owner's profit. The ocean supplied the water for free. It did not supply operating leverage for free, restore the normal harvest, but reduce the selling price by 20%. At $1.12 per kilogram, revenue falls to $134,400. The farm is around break-even before debt and replacement capital. Combine both shocks, and the result becomes worse. 90 tons sold at $1.12 per kilogram generates $100,800. Against roughly $129,000 in operating cost, the farm loses more than $28,000. The better model is not necessarily a larger farm. It may be a fishing family that already owns the boat, shares hatchery capacity, secures a minimum volume contract, and keeps both premium and bulk outlets. The species has not changed. The surrounding system has changed the economics. The storm and carbon traps. Now imagine a storm arrives 3 weeks before harvest. Several lines tangle and part of the crop is lost. Revenue disappears with the biomass. Repair costs rise. The processor receives less product and may favor a more reliable supplier next season. New equipment must be installed before the next crop. Insurance may cover damaged gear, but not the crop, lost profit, or customer relationship. A seaweed farm can lose the crop, the equipment, and the customer in the same storm. The first two are visible immediately. The third may not appear until the next contract is awarded. There is also contamination risk. Seaweed absorbs compounds from surrounding water, so buyers may test for heavy metals, iodine, microbes, and other contaminants. A crop can look excellent and still fail the buyer's specification. Then there is the environmental promise. Seaweed can absorb nutrients, create habitat, and use no farmland or freshwater. But environmental value is not automatically revenue. Seaweed captures carbon while growing, but if the crop is eaten, burned, or decomposes, much of that carbon can return to the atmosphere. Photosynthesis is not a purchase order. Count carbon or nutrient credit income only when a buyer measurement method, verification system, and payment contract actually exist. Grants can help a farm learn and expand, but they do not prove that customers will buy the harvest profitably. The ownership traps. The first trap is growing before selling. A list of possible products is not a purchase order. Plant only after understanding the buyer, volume, price, and quality standard. The second trap is confusing wet tons with saleable product. Water creates impressive photographs and expensive transport. Usable yield after processing is what matters. The third trap is buying a boat for one seasonal crop. A seasonal vessel may sit idle for most of the year. If Seaweed must pay for every asset from zero, the farm is expensive. If it fills the off-season of boats, crews, and facilities you already own, the same farm can become attractive. The fourth trap is building processing too early. A dryer needs throughput. The owner can escape one processor only to become dependent on feeding an underused factory. The fifth trap is chasing the highest price per kilogram. Premium markets may pay more but absorb little volume. The sixth trap is treating grants as product market fit. Funding can reduce early risk. It cannot guarantee customers. The seventh trap is using carbon credits to rescue weak economics. Environmental income should be contracted upside, not the assumption holding the farm together. The final trap is scaling the ocean before scaling the bottleneck. The real limit may be seed, permits, boat days, processing, or sales. More water does not solve a bottleneck on land. The ownership verdict. So what separates a valuable seaweed farm from a collection of wet ropes? Not the size of the lease, not the weight of the harvest. It is the owner's control over a reliable route from seed to a paying customer. A strong owner begins with demand. They choose a species because a buyer needs it. They secure a productive, accessible site and prove yield before expanding. They reserve processing capacity before harvest. They share boats, hatcheries, and factories when ownership would leave assets idle. They measure usable kilograms per meter, not headline wet tons. They understand profit by site, buyer, and processing route. They maintain enough capital to replace equipment and survive a lost season. A weak owner buys the story. They see a crop that grows without land or fresh water and assume nature has removed cost. They install lines first, search for customers later, and value wet biomass using retail prices. They build a dryer before securing enough volume. They count environmental benefits as revenue. They finance a boat using the best yield from a trial. Then the crop becomes ready. The weather closes. the processor fills, the blades begin to foul, and every extra day in the water converts projected revenue into lower quality biomass. The most dangerous seaweed farm is not one where nothing grows. Failure is obvious there. The dangerous farm grows beautifully, because a heavy harvest can hide the fact that no profitable customer is waiting on shore. The complete economics form a chain. The permit controls the site, the hatchery controls the seed, the site and season control the yield, the boat and weather control the harvest, processing controls shelf life, the product controls price, the buyer controls whether that price becomes revenue, and financing determines whether the owner survives when one link breaks. The ocean is an extraordinary biological production system. But it is not a cold storage warehouse, a processing plant, a sales team, or a guaranteed market. So, are you buying a farm? Only partly. You are buying a marine lease, a seasonal logistics operation, and a claim on whatever value remains after weather, processing, and buyer power take their share. In the strongest model, Seaweed uses assets you already own, fills an off-season, supplies a contracted processor, and feeds a product valuable enough to support local production costs. In the weakest model, you own specialized equipment in public water, a crop with a short clock, and hundreds of tons that become less valuable the farther they travel. Seaweed may grow without farmland. Profit does not. The crop is created in the ocean. The margin is created on shore, and the owner wins only by controlling the distance between them.